If you would, turn in your Bibles to Numbers chapter 17. It's our mission to tackle chapters 17 and 18 this evening. Really, 16, 17, and 18, but it's not our way to teach through that many chapters in one sitting, as much as I would like to. 16, 17, and 18 really should be taught together. So the event that kind of leads to everything else transpiring, you remember in chapter 16, there's what was known as Korah's rebellion. Korah decided that he no longer wanted to be assisting or assistant to the priests, but rather he wanted to be the member, he wanted to be the priest. So Korah had gathered together 250 people that were of name. It doesn't really tell us how or why they were notable, but he gathered these 250 people along with some from the tribe of Reuben. So we see kind of this, not just a religious rebellion, but also something of a political one. They wanted Moses and Aaron removed, and they wanted themselves to be in this place of religious authority and something of a leadership or a political authority, if you will. And we remember kind of what had transpired through the rest of chapter 16. For starters, Moses told them, this is God's thing, this is God's ministry, this is God's priesthood. So you 250 men, you gather up your censers, go ahead and put fire in your censers, and you show up tomorrow morning, we're going to see what God's going to do. And we see those 250 men, we see all of the rebellion of Korah essentially crushed halfway through the chapter. And then it says the next day, there was another rebellion that had kind of grown out of the concept of, well, Moses and Aaron, you're in trouble now because you are the ones that killed God's people. Kind of just completely oblivious to what it is that's actually transpiring. And so we see a plague that killed a little over 14,000 people. So in those 2 days, we see almost 15,000 people killed. And you remember Aaron, being encouraged by Moses, went out with his censer, with the incense, that thing that kind of represents our prayers as going up to the Lord. He went and stood between those who have already died from the plague and those that were still living, thusly stopping the plague. In chapter 16, we're given the first sign or the first physical aspect of memorial. The 250 censers that were brought out during that initial rebellion, they were supposed to, Eleazar, the son of Aaron, was supposed to hammer the censers and stick the censers on the outside of the altar. So that was going to be their first memorial. And it's really not hard to figure out how that was going to make them remember who was supposed to be the priesthood. Because now, if the altar wasn't heavy enough, now there's 250 hammered down censers that were kind of stuck around it. Chapters 17 and 18 is going to give us our other two things for memorial. In chapter 17, it's going to be another physical object for remembrance. And in chapter 18, it's going to be a vocal. God is going to remind the priesthood and the Levites kind of their duties and what they're supposed to be, not just doing, but how to, I guess, a reminder to be considerate of what it is that they are doing. So this evening, we're going to pick up in chapter 17. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and get from them a rod from each father's house. All their leaders, according to their father's houses, 12 rods, write each man's name on his rod. And you shall write Aaron's name on the rod of Levi. For there shall be one rod for the head of each father's house. Then you shall place him in the tabernacle of meeting before the testimony where I meet with you. And it shall be that the rod of the man whom I choose will blossom. Thus I will rid myself of the complaints of the children of Israel, which they make against you." So in the first 5 verses, we've got a pretty solid understanding already of what we're dealing with in chapter 17. The people were complaining against Moses as a leader, and they're complaining against Aaron as God's established leader for the priesthood. It would seem either here with what they're dealing with or with what's coming, because it's going to come up again. They're still contending with Aaron's leadership as the priest. And it kind of makes sense. It's not hard to be contentious with those that are in leadership or with those that are in authority. And we're kind of used to, we're used to that one culturally, but especially for the priest, because we have to remember, Aaron was still just a man. Aaron was still just a dude. So it'd be easy to kind of pick up on something maybe that Aaron was doing. It was like, well, he's not holy enough to be the high priest. He's not holy enough to be the one going into the tabernacle. So it might be, then again, that's just kind of my own opinion. It might be easy for people to contend with Aaron in that way, but his leadership is still being contended with. We see that in verse 5, these complaints that the children of Israel are making against you. Now, chapter 16, 17, and 18, these are transpiring within that 38-year wandering period, but we don't know exactly when within that 38 years that this is taking place. So the Lord tells Moses, because Aaron's priestly authority is still being challenged, he's going to go to each of the tribes, and they're going to gather a stick, a rod, a staff, something that they had. We'll kind of go into the staff a little bit more here towards the end of the chapter. Each person is going to write their name on it, and each one is going to give it to Moses so that Moses can take it into the tabernacle, because he had to gather a staff. It's kind of neat. A staff from every one of the tribes. It kind of points to the concept that all of the tribes somewhere were complicit in the rebellion that had transpired shortly before this. So God has a way that's going to settle it once and for all. So, verse 6, so Moses spoke to the children of Israel, and each of their leaders gave him a rod apiece. For each leader, according to their fathers' houses, 12 rods, and the rod of Aaron was among their rods. And Moses placed the rods before the Lord in the tabernacle of witness. Moses doing exactly what the Lord commanded him. Go ask for 12 rods. Each tribe, including Aaron, brought out their rods with their specific names on it. He takes it into the tabernacle and he lays them before the Lord. Now it came to pass on the next day that Moses went into the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds, produced blossoms, and yielded ripe almonds. This is probably one of the neatest verses in all of the Bible, because God just does amazing things. It's easy for us to overlook the cool stuff that God does. It takes 7 or 8 months for that almond to come to a place of being ripe, being able to eat it. Apparently, this is something that Megan pulled up online. It takes a gallon of water per almond to make the almond. Apparently, a lot of work goes into an almond. This had transpired overnight. God does really cool stuff. The thing I like the most about this passage, one, I mean, God is just doing something that's just otherwise not possible. It's just not going to happen. I can just kind of imagine the look on everybody's faces when his dead stick is full of life. It's not just there was almonds on the stick. If you look at the text, especially the syntax, that it has buds, blossoms, and ripe almonds. So this dead stick has all of kind of that cycle of life of the particular almond on that stick. Only God can do that. I think the reason I love this verse so much, this particular verse so much, I think it's kind of one of the neatest ones through all of the Word. And I don't want it to sound bad, but really we're just a bunch of sticks. Before Christ, that's what we are. We're a dead branch. We're a dead stick. And this stick is resurrected to bear witness and to bear fruit. You just kind of see all of the amazing correlations that kind of go into that one. Now we see almonds mentioned a few times in the Word. You remember in Exodus 25 and Exodus 37, the menorah, the lampstand that is in the tabernacle, the cups are shaped like almonds. And then you have Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 11 or verse 14. We have the concept of the almond and the fruition of God's work and his word, and these things are going to be brought to pass. We have a lot of neat stuff about the almond, but the fact that the stick is used to, it's resurrected, like life is brought back into the stick. And it's resurrected to bear witness of who is supposed to be the priest, who God has chosen, but the stick was also used to bear fruit. Just the correlation for the believer. I think that's kind of the most that I get out of it. Because when you're a dead stick and you're lifeless, you're really only meant for one thing as a dead stick. Either hitting your siblings, or you're used to help kindle a fire. But God puts life back into that stick. And it is important to note, and I mean it is what we see here in the text, that only Aaron's rod had life on it, had produced life. And it's really important to note that this is not proof that Aaron is more spiritual. This is not proof that Aaron is essentially the most qualified. This stick budding is not something that Aaron had done whatsoever. This stick producing this witness, that witness being in God's sovereignty, and in his mercy, he has chosen Aaron, or he has elected for Aaron to be the high priest. Because it's easy to be able to take things out of context. Like, oh, clearly Aaron's the most holy. And we completely bypass what God is doing. We got to be really careful about that, because we still do it with pastors or teachers or worship leaders. A lot of people, well, he's the pastor because he's the most holy person in the community. No. Please don't put that on me. This is God's calling. This is God's sovereign choice for Aaron. And his lineage, specifically, him being called essentially apart from the Levites. You have to remember, all of the priesthood were Levites, but not all of the Levites were a part of the priesthood. Only Aaron, and specifically Aaron's bloodline, were the ones allowed to be the priests. So it's important to really note, and I've got a side note in here, that you're going to have miraculous fruit when godly authority and leadership is practiced. When you're doing it God's way, you're going to have fruit. Sometimes fruit bears quickly, like in the almond. Sometimes fruit goes slowly. Sometimes we don't get to see fruit at all. That's where faith comes in. We do not walk by sight, but we walk by faith. It's one of the things that I struggle with the most, apparently, this time of the year, is what we discussed last night in our prayer meeting. I get weird around this time of year. I wasn't patterning it. Friends of mine were patterning it. It's like, we're just expecting you to be weird this time of year. We're coming up on our 4-year mark here in a month. In a month, we've been here 4 years. And I always get kind of this worldly mentality of, what's working, what's not working, what should we get rid of, what should we bring in, what's going to produce maybe these kind of results, a positive result. What are things we're doing that produce negative results? Now, is that a great business strategy? 100% absolutely. Out with the old, in with the new. But when you start assessing the things that God is doing with a secular model, you're flirting with disaster, which is something I think that my people were reminding me of yesterday. Because it's easy to think this, well, not a lot of fruit's being produced. But you got to remember a couple of things. One, you can't always see the fruit like they can clearly hear, because it was God's purpose for them to see the fruit immediately. So you can't always see the fruit. Two, we're actually not called to be successful. We're called to be faithful. We're called to be steadfast. Now, is it easy to be faithful when things are going like really well? Absolutely. It's when things get hard, or we come up to a 12-month assessment, that we start reconsidering things that are going on. So it's good to be focused, essentially, as a side note, on what God is doing. But we do have miraculous fruit when godly authority and leadership is practiced. If you're just practicing things and you're doing things God's way, there's going to be a godly fruit. So it put forth buds, blossoms, and yielded ripe autumns. Moses brought out these sticks, and one stick didn't look like the other sticks. One stick was just full of life. All the stages of the life of this almond is what is covering up Aaron's rod. So then Moses brought out all the rods from before the Lord to all the children of Israel, and they looked, and each man took his rod. When it says all the children of Israel, it's probably just talking about the tribal leaders. That's probably what it's talking about. And what do? They just go get their stick. That's awesome. I love what's in the text. Again, I like what's missing from the text. There's no arguments. How do you even argue with it? I know we still try in our own fleshly way, but they're seeing Aaron's stick. It's like, you know what? There's good one. There's no way that Moses or Aaron could have produced live almonds on that thing overnight. I can see, like, it's my nature. I can be cynical. I'm not very trusting. I don't think I would have taken my tribal stick in silence like these men had. I would have requested to eat one of those holy almonds. I was like, you know what? You pluck one of those off of there and you hand it to me. I want to make sure that that's actually an almond and not some shaved up piece of wood. We don't see it out of them. Here at this point in chapter 17, they accept defeat silently at the moment, and they take the sticks and they're getting ready to go their own way. And the Lord said to Moses, bring Aaron's rod back before the testimony to be kept as a sign against the rebels, that you may put their complaints away from me, lest they die. We have already seen, and we know what's in front of us in the book of Numbers, what happens when you complain. They're a little, at this place, apparently a little slower to learn, but it's going to be kept as a sign. Aaron does not get his stick back. It's going to go into the Ark of the Covenant. And every time we come to this place, I feel like I have to make the note. We should be doing something similar. I'm not saying keep a stick everywhere you go, but you should have some things in your walk as a believer that are little pillars. A prayer journal or a Jehovah Jireh journal, just something so when you're praying or when God does something, or you're struggling in a specific temptation, or you're struggling in a certain, an era or a season in your life, you should record those prayers. You should record the things that God does during that season, because it's not the only time you're going to be in that season or face that temptation. So you have something to kind of go back to. This is something that has been done. This is my response. Look at the thing that God has done. So this is going to be kept as a testimony against the complainers. So you have to really ask, how did it remind people if it was hidden? Have you really thought about that? It's not something like, who gets to see the Ark of the Covenant? Just one guy. Once a year gets to see the Ark of the Covenant. Aaron or one of his sons, after Aaron dies, they're the ones that get to go into the Holy of Holies. So how is it a sign if it is hidden? Because everybody else still got their stick back. We keep calling it a stick, and that's probably a very poor rendering, and that's my fault. My Bible does use the word rod. But each tribal leader probably had their own rod, just like kings, rulers of Thessaly, whatever else. They still have some of these things that are on showcases in museums. A ruler, tribal ruler, family ruler, or a national ruler, they would have like a scepter. A conquered king would render the scepter to whichever one had conquered him. So each tribal ruler, every time they picked up their stick with their name on it, they knew what they were wielding was a dead stick. In Aaron's rod, that rod that singled him out, saying that he was chosen for the priestly ministry, is the one that is being kept alive within the Ark of the Covenant. So that's probably how. Verse 11. Thus did Moses, just as the Lord had commanded him, so he did. So the children of Israel spoke to Moses, saying, surely we die, we perish, we all perish. Whoever even comes near the tabernacle of the Lord must die. Shall we all utterly die? Does that not just kind of seem weird and out of place? Nothing has transpired, except for a stick growing some almonds, a rod. I really should stop calling it a stick. A rod that was growing almonds. This is what's happened. Aaron's priestly authority is no longer contended, at least here, and his rod is moved into the tabernacle. Why are all of the Israelites overreacting and panicking now? Probably a couple of reasons. First, I think I would avoid the concept that they are overreacting. Maybe they're overreacting, but it could be a conviction of sin. Because now the whole matter has come full circle and settled that Aaron is the one that God has chosen and Moses is the one that God has chosen. But I think more likely, conviction of sin is absolutely possible. I think more likely that, at least externally, the fear of the Lord is back in the camp. It's easy, especially in a place of swept up rebellion, right? That mob mentality, because all of the tribes, including the Levites, had levied themselves against the chosen servants of the Lord. And now God, after killing, apparently it wasn't enough, but after 15,000 people and a rod that grew almonds, now the fear of the Lord is back in the camp, and now they're panicking a little bit because now they know exactly who it was that they were in rebellion against. So before we go into chapter 18, we see that fear of the Lord back in the camp, or if it's a conviction of sin. And as a side note, before we start chapter 18, I really like verse 11. Thus Moses did just as the Lord had commanded him, so he did. It's just neat having that repetition in verse 11. That is something that I kind of aspire to. I failed at it a lot, probably a lot more than I have done well in. But that's how we should really want to live and how we should be known. This is what God has wanted to do, so this is what I did. But the first, 80% of our testimony is what? This is what God wanted me to do, and this I did not did. Better late than never, but it is something amazing to aspire to. So, chapter 18. As we wrapped up 16 and 17, we had two physical reminders in their rebellion. First, their physical reminder second was the staff. The first one were all of the hammered out censers that were then stuck on the outside of the altar. Chapter 18, we're focusing again solely on the priests and the Levites. This is our third reminder for chapter 18, and it is a verbal reminder. God is reminding the priests and the Levites of their responsibilities, of their focus, but he's also kind of giving them an amplification of their duties and their focus. Because right now, especially, what's going on with the priesthood? It's a mess. Now, was the situation resolved? Yes. Aaron's in charge. The Levites are there as a gift. They're there as assistants to the priests. God put his foot down. Basically, what happened? Kids got in a fight. Dad put his foot down. Squashed the whole kind of rebellion. When two friends are fighting and there's just a lot of beef and there's an issue and it comes to a head and it gets resolved, there's aftermath. It's going to be weird for a minute. You have to remember the Levites were just in rebellion against Aaron. All the people that are supposed to, now they outnumber Aaron's family. They're supposed to be the assisting element to the priesthood, and they have just tried to take the priesthood, and they all have to go back to work together the next day. So God is giving that reminder and amplification of their responsibilities and their focus. And this chapter is kind of a heavy one, but a quick one. So then the Lord said to Aaron, so now we normally have God speaking to Moses or speaking to Moses and Aaron. This one, because it's dealing specifically with the priesthood and the Levites, this one is going specifically to and through Aaron. You and your sons And your father's house with you shall bear the iniquity related to the sanctuary, and you and your sons with you shall bear the iniquity associated with your priesthood. What does that mean? They are accountable to God for any offenses against the sanctuary. They are being reminded. That's a heavy verse. For me as a pastor, that is a heavy verse. Because I'm responsible to the Lord for everything that transpires within what he has given to me as a steward, as a pastor. If I let sin run rampant in the church, this is where people typically get squeamish. This is where I get squeamish. Because when pastors have to come down and judge sin in the fellowship, how many people are huge fans? I have a hard time addressing it, and nobody wants to be pulled aside like, hey, so not good. Because we always adopt this mentality, well, you can't judge me. That is a completely false, broken concept. We're going to be, again, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, where Paul is judging the church in Corinth. It says, I do not praise you in this. When you come together, you do not come together for good, but you come together for the worse. What is Paul doing? He is passing judgment and assessment of what is transpiring. He's going to continue to say in chapter 11, I'm not going to rob it too much because I got to teach it in 2 days. He says, if you judged yourselves, you wouldn't be judged. So he uses the word specifically judge a couple times in that chapter. We'll break down judgment when we get there. But here for the Levites and for the priesthood, he's saying, you know what? If someone is allowed to transgress against the tabernacle, or you become slack in your duties as a priest, you will bear the guilt of your iniquity. You are accountable to God. I don't know what that would have done to Aaron's countenance, because he just had 2 major victories. Not just the budding rod, which fully essentially set him in his place as, God's chosen one for the priesthood. But you have to remember, he's also the one that took the censer and stopped more than 14,000 people being killed as he stood in between the living and the dead in chapter 16. So now he's hearing if there's anyone that transgresses, and he will break down the concept of transgression, but it's going to fall on Aaron. He is responsible and he is accountable to God for it. In verses 2 through 7, it's going to demonstrate the Levites functioning as assistants. So also bring with you your brethren of the tribe of Levi, the tribe of your father. They may be joined with you and serve you while you and your sons are with you before the tabernacle of witness. We see it given very specifically, probably because of when you've had someone turn on you so sharply, like the Levites did. You remember Korah, a Kohathite, a Levite, when he's trying to lead a rebellion to usurp the authority of the priesthood, it's a big deal. And we see all the other tribes in chapter 17 backing him in it. It's easy when someone kind of, I don't really know how else to put it, kind of takes a bite at you. It would be easy to do what with that individual? You are no longer profitable. You are no longer worthy, and you can no longer be trusted. You are to be put out. It would be easy for Moses and Aaron to put out the Levites. God's letting them know, it's like, you're not choosing this thing. I am choosing this thing. You need to make sure they're there helping you. They shall attend to your needs and all the needs of the tabernacle, but they shall not come near the articles of the sanctuary and the altar, lest they die and you also. So they're to assist in the processes of the tabernacle, but they could not touch the articles. So they couldn't touch, for example, until it was covered. We remember that section, the table of showbread, the candle, the altar of incense, or going to the Holy of Holies they had, or the altar. When it says the altar, it's the sacrificial altar, the big altar, the brazen altar out front. They couldn't touch or minister upon those things, so they couldn't take the offering and actually put it up onto the altar. And this is hard, because they had this integral place in ministry, but they weren't like the head honcho in ministry. And it reminds us, and we won't get into it too much, sake of time, and this is where we're going. But 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 4 through 7, we have different parts of the body, different gifts, different calling in the body, but still one body. It's easy to kind of lose focus, which is exactly what happened in chapter 16 with Korah and his rebellion. But he says they're not to come near the altar, or they will die. Not just them, and you. That's the part that I don't like as a pastor. It's like, I'm going to be punished because some dope decided to transgress in an area that I might not have been very vigilant in. God is saying, you know what? There's not going to be an excuse for an ignorance or a lack of observance here. He's warning the priesthood to be more vigilant and to be more diligent. Not just Aaron and his sons, but also that of the Levites. You must be diligent against the transgression that can take place within the tabernacle. And you shall attend to the duties of the sanctuary, the duties of the altar, that there may be no more wrath on the children of Israel. Oh, I guess I should point out. But an outsider shall not come near you. Who is the outsider? Now, a lot of people say, well, it's anybody that's not a Jew. In Numbers chapter 16, verse 40, what we covered last week, the outsider. That no outsider who is not a descendant of Aaron. So it's not just the Gentiles, if you will, that obviously couldn't transgress against the tabernacle, but the Levites were not allowed also to transgress into the priestly ministries. For lack of better words, they were called to stay in their lane. They had a ministry set that they were given and a calling they were given to fulfill, and needed to stay in the lane and the path of that calling, not trying to transgress out of their calling, joining to the tribe of Reuben or whatever, and they couldn't transgress out of their calling into the place of the priestly ministries. So behold, I myself have taken your brethren, the Levites, from among the children of Israel. They are a gift to you, given by the Lord to do the work of the tabernacle of meeting. Therefore, you and your sons with you shall attend to your priesthood for everything at the altar and behind the veil, and you shall serve. I give your priesthood to you as a gift for service, but the outsider who comes near shall be put to death. We get kind of weird about that. He took the Levites and he gave them as a gift. And because of where we are culturally, that puts a funky taste in our mouth. It's like he gave an entire people group to another people group as a gift. Like, we have other words for that in our own 21st century Western vernacular, and none of them are good. So you say, how is God doing this thing? He's going to call it a good gift. How is that a good gift? Assistance to assist in every way is a gift. That is what is meant in the text here. This is actually something that I can fully speak to. Having people with me and given to me to assist in everything possible is the greatest gift in ministry, period. Above anything else, having people there to work with you through all of it is the greatest gift you can have in ministry, because you're not doing it by yourself. You're not bearing the load by yourself. You're not bearing the victory by yourself, which I know kind of sounds dumb, but sometimes we have victories. Those become more encumbering than our failures. But they share in the work. They bear the load. They share in the victories. They share in the failures. They share in the hard things. Aaron only had a few sons left. You remember 2 of them were killed as soon as they had the ribbon cutting ceremony for the tabernacle. Having the Levites there to move the animals, cutting up the animals, processing, moving things from the tabernacle, the refuse outside of the camp, all of these other things, carrying it. This was supposed to be a huge gift of help to the priesthood. Verses 8 through 20 is support for the Levites. We're going to take this as mostly a chunk. And the Lord spoke to Aaron, "Here, I myself have also given you charge of my heave offerings. All the holy gifts of the children of Israel I have given them as a portion to you and your sons as an ordinance forever. This shall be yours of the most holy things reserved from the fire. Every offering of theirs, every grain offering, every sin offering, and every trespass offering, which they render to me, shall be most holy for you and your sons. So the first part we see, well, in this whole chunk, the Levites are being supported. In the first little bit, what we're really talking about is how the Levites are being supported with food. So he's talking about these heave offerings. This particular portion of the heave offering is talking about coming from the peace offering. Remember that Exodus 29 and Leviticus 7. It's saying that this portion kept for you from this particular heave offering is a most holy thing, and it was only to be eaten by Aaron and his sons. Only the men in the family were allowed to partake of this particular offering. The next offering they get into, from the free will offerings, that was a part of the food, if you will, that was going to feed all of the rest of the family. In a most holy place you shall eat it. Every male shall eat it. It shall be holy to you. This also is yours, the heave offering of their gift. Again, the free will offerings. With all the wave offerings of children of Israel, I have given them to you and your sons and daughters with you as an ordinance forever. Everyone who is clean in your house may eat it. All the best of the oil, the best of the new wine, the grain, their first fruits, which they offer to the Lord, I have given them to you. Whatever first ripe fruit is in their land, which they bring to the Lord, shall be yours. Everyone who is clean in your house may eat it. Every devoted thing in Israel shall be yours. Everything that first opens the womb of all flesh, which they bring to the Lord, whether man or beast, shall be yours. Nevertheless, the firstborn of man you shall surely redeem, as we've already discussed in Leviticus. And the firstborn of unclean animals you shall redeem. And those redeemed of the devoted things you shall redeem when 1 month old, according to your valuation, for 5 shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, which is 20 gerahs. But the firstborn of a cow, the firstborn of a sheep, or the firstborn of a goat you shall not redeem. They are holy, which means those things can't be purchased back. Those have to go to the Lord. You shall sprinkle their blood on the altar and burn their fat as an offering made by fire for a sweet aroma to the Lord. And their flesh shall be yours, just as the wave breast and the right thigh are yours. All the heave offerings of the holy things which the children of Israel offer to the Lord, I have given to you, your sons and daughters, with you as an ordinance forever. It is a covenant of salt forever before the Lord, with you and your descendants with you. That is a lot. Before we get into the lot that the Levites and the priesthood are receiving, he says it's going to be a covenant of salt. What does that mean? A lot of people get really weird about that one. We have more context in 2 Chronicles, chapter 13, verse 5. Should you not know that the Lord God of Israel gave dominion over Israel to David forever, to him and his sons, by a covenant of salt? Salt is something that cannot putrefy. So it's simply saying this is going to be a lasting covenant. It's an ordinance established forever. It's easy to look at that list. And for me, in this last year, you know, being a pastor in a small town, it'll make one nervous. Being a full-time pastor in a small town will really make someone nervous. And you really have to look to the Lord for provision. You know, we don't make a lot of money. So we get to a place of being nervous, like, Lord, how am I going to afford to feed my family? This is something. And even just a little, it's just neat what God gives, like the littlest thing, how huge it is. So this year alone, you know, people that were hunting, they'd given us some elk meat. We were given like half a cow, which we're still working through. And that thing, I don't even know when we got that. When did we get that thing? No. In the spring. Yeah. So we're still working through that, and we've given some of what I was given out to people that needed food. That's 1/2 of a cow. And it's still going. How much does it look like the Levites are receiving right here? How much does it look like the priesthood's receiving? It's a lot. The Levites, the tribe of Levi, to include the priesthood, there's not that many of them. We did all the counting. If you want to go back and reread the first 10 chapters, you go do that. But they're greatly outnumbered. and they're receiving all this stuff. And it's easy to look at what they're receiving and be like, you know what? You guys are receiving too much. Now, I'm not saying that we'll take this kind of out of context and we'll put it to where we are now. It's easy to look at a pastor and be like, you know what? You are taking too much. Now, do pastors or priests or reverends kind of go pinching off a little more than they can? Absolutely. It absolutely happens. People get greedy and covetous and lustful. But it's easy to be like, why are you guys, the Levites and your priesthood, why are you taking so much? They have taken much. And this is a lot. Quite frankly, we haven't even finished it yet. This is a lot. You have to remember, they're taking much as the Lord has given to them because they have given up much. It's like, well, what could they have possibly given up to require all this be given to the tribe of Levi? We'll reach verse 20. The Lord said to Aaron, you shall have no inheritance in the land, nor shall you have any portion among them. I am your portion and your inheritance among the children of Israel. That's such a powerful verse for me. I love that verse. But when he says you have no inheritance, like, okay, big deal. They're not going to get land. God's given them a blessing. They don't have to mow it. That's how I've always looked at land. I don't want to mow it. What does that matter? We need to remember something. This is going to be an agrarian society. It's agricultural. They're going to be growing crops. They're raising cattle, flocks, all this stuff. That is how they're going to make their money. Buy, sell, trade, eating, all of this stuff is going to be based off of that kind of agrarian society and having, the animals. They're not going to have any of that stuff. They will have no land to possess to where they can do that. The only means they have of being supported are the things that the Lord is giving to them. So no land, no ability to make money. God is their focus. The Lord is their sole focus. These guys, just like pastors, they're not hirelings. This isn't essentially a job. They are being supported so that they can be essentially allowed to do the calling, to sow and to plant those spiritual things among the people. Like they're there in the middle, if you will, maintaining the covenant, their relationship with the Lord. So they're receiving much because they have been required to forfeit much. And it reminds them, I'm your portion, I'm your inheritance. We forget that as a church. We want our portion. We want our inheritance or our money. We want the fruit of our labor and the fruit of our own hands. I'm definitely not saying it's bad to work. Don't go running off and quitting your jobs. But the problem is we get so focused on the secular things, we completely forget about the Lord. Or the Lord gets all of the leftovers. The Lord gets all of the leftover time, the leftover devotions, the leftover worship. For the Levites, for the priesthood, they weren't supposed to be afforded even that opportunity. All of what they were wrapped up into their relationship and the service to the Lord. Verse 21, tithe supports for the Levites. This is what we don't like talking about. Talking about money. We are not going to be discussing New Testament giving. If you want to read on New Testament giving, 1 Corinthians 16 and 2 Corinthians 2 give us 7 aspects or attitudes or characteristics of Christian giving. In 1 Corinthians, that it should be planned, proportional, regular, and private. In 2 Corinthians, it's supposed to be generous, freely given, and cheerful. That's all I'm going to say about those. If you want to go and look at those texts, because we're just going to keep it in context tonight because we're already going to go a little over, those are the passages you can read. So, behold, I have given the children of Levi all the tithes in Israel as an inheritance, or literally a possession, in return for the work which they perform, the work of the tabernacle of meeting. Kind of a reminder to be diligent in the things that you have been given to by the Lord. we have three dominant kind of areas of tithes as we work through the Old Testament. Here, we're talking about the Levites. In Deuteronomy chapter 14, we're talking about a tithe that will be eaten before the Lord. You remember in Leviticus 27, this tithe to the poor. And tithes is the one area in the Bible that we are actually called to test him on. And truly, that calling and the promises that are therein, I would say also absolutely extend to the church. But the Israelites did not have a choice in tithing. In the New Testament, the church is not actually commanded to tithe, though obviously encouraged. And people ask, well, what are the tithes for? Everything. We use it to keep the lights on. We use it to make sure the equipment is functioning properly. We use it for the training of any of the staff within the assembly. We use it to feed the kids. We use it to feed the adults, keep sneaking back there and eating all the kids' stuff. We chuckle about it. But me and Megan were burning through boxes. This is when we were serving in Gooding in a church we helped plant. We were burning through boxes of goldfish and candy and the gummies. And I felt bad later because I actually thought a kid was like in there like pilfering and stealing stuff. Well, Megan and I had to stay late. So we decided to stay all day on Sunday because I would teach Sunday nights. We had showers in that particular church, so I come out of the shower and I heard a noise. I was like, oh, the little kid's in there eating my snacks. He's dead. It wasn't a kid. It was a senior pastor. He was in there rummaging all the kids' snacks. It's like, dude, you're stealing from the kids. And he's like, well, we're just going to go buy more. I was like, that's the complete wrong attitude. Go buy yourself a hamburger, stay out of my snack. So we ended up locking him out of our snack. Yeah, wacky fun. So they were very serious about tithes. In Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 through 10, this is what is said of tithes. Will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. So the concept of tithes was a very, very serious ordeal with the Israelites. So hereafter the children of Israel shall not come near the tabernacle meeting, lest they bear the sin and die. I also need to point out tithing. A lot of people, pastors or people who are dealing with pastors, especially the ones that are asking for money, it's like, well, you know what? We're the church. We are no longer under the Mosaic law. This is Mosaic law. We're no longer under Mosaic law or Levitical law that is requiring us to pay tithes. That's a half-truth. Are we under the Levitical or the Mosaic law? No. We should all be shaking our heads no. We went through the book of Romans. Don't worry, we're going to go into the book of Hebrews soon. If you didn't figure it out in Romans, you're going to figure it out in Hebrews. We are not under the law. We are not bound to the law. It's important to note in Hebrews chapter 7 that the concept of the tithe was instituted before the Mosaic law. It was outside of the Mosaic law. For example, Abraham. Where did his tribute go? So you're going to see all these little things of tithes even outside the concepts of the Mosaic law. You should absolutely, tithing isn't really the right word for it now, but you really should be, as a church, in that place of giving. It's like, well, naturally the pastor's up there asking for money. He's obviously going to do that because he just went full-time ministry. Thank you for being honest. Here's the big benefit to it. And it has nothing to do with me. I pay my tithes. See, I don't like the way that sounds. We're going to change that. Anyway, it does two things. One, it puts you in this place of essentially testing the Lord in the right way, since we're so prone to testing him in the wrong. But it forces you to be a good steward. So when I tithe, I do pay 10%. It's just a great place it's a great place to start. I do 10%. Do you know what 10% of your salary is? The only way for you to know what 10% of your salary is to go in and do what? Your finances, to balance your books. It's making you be a good steward. God has put away, even in the law, to help you be a good steward. So even if you don't want to give 10%, that's fine. There's no legalistic thing for the church now as to how much you pay, whether it's 2%, 10%, 30%. Some people's 2% is more righteous or more holy than their 10%, which is a whole different teaching that we really don't have time for. But whatever it is, you actually have to go in and budget. You actually have to go in and be a good steward with the things that God has given you. So if you're not there yet, it probably should be a place you should be going prayerfully soon, because it will help you be a better steward. Anyway, moving on. But the Levites, verse 23, shall perform the work of the tabernacle of meeting, and they shall bear their iniquity. It shall be a statute forever throughout their generations, that among the children of Israel they shall have no inheritance. For the tithes of the children of Israel, which they offer up as a heave offering to the Lord, I have given to the Levites as an inheritance. Therefore I have said to them, among the children of Israel, they shall have no inheritance. This is neat. Do you see what I have said among the children of Israel? Now, he said it to Moses. He said it to Aaron. He said it to the Levites. But now he's telling everybody else. Why? It doesn't give us anything in text, so this is my opinion, but it's to keep those guys in check. In case a Levite did want to stray outside of his realm and decide to buy up land or decide, to go outside of what he was given. Everyone else is like, I know you. You're a Levite. What the heck are you doing out here? Get your butt back over to Nob or whatever city it was. They were given a number of cities they were allowed to stay in. You go and you stay there. They're keeping the priesthood in check. Verse 25, tables are turning. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak thus to the Levites and say to them, When you take from the children of Israel the tithes, which I have given you from them as your inheritance. You have to remember, up to this point, this is all good news. Depending on your heart with the Lord, even this section is good news. But right now, what does it look like they're doing? It looks like they're standing to make a lot of money, a lot of beef, because of what is coming their way. But God has this in front of him, verse 26. Then you shall offer up a heave offering of it to the Lord in a tenth of the tithe. The Levites were still required to pay tithes. Pastors, priests, bishops, whatever, they should still be giving their offering to the Lord. And your heave offering shall be reckoned to you as though it were the grain of the threshing floor and as the fullness of the winepress. Weirded weird? It's worded weird. What does this verse mean? When they're going to offer up their tithe, it will be as if they had worked for it themselves. It was a work of their own hands going forward as the tithe. Because it's easy to be like, well, the Lord said we're supposed to tithe, but I didn't actually gather this crop. So I can't offer it as a first fruits because it's not technically my first fruits. It's the first fruits to God, but it's second fruit to me. This is really my third fruit. God is saying this is how it's going to be reckoned. You will give up of the first fruit. You will give up of the heave offerings. You will give up of the tithe as if it was something that was reckoned from your own hands, if that makes sense, everybody. Sorry, we're just kind of blowing through these now. Poor Megan. Verse 28, Thus you shall also offer a heave offering to the Lord from all your tithes which you receive from the children of Israel. And you shall give the Lord's heave offering from it to Aaron the priest. So now we know how these things are flowing towards the priesthood. So if the Levites have a lot, it would seem that the priesthood has a lot less. But I would say this before we continue. That's the worst kind of attitude to have. If I give to this, I'm going to have a lot less. We're looking at our offering wrong. And it can cause even the children of Israel, like, if I give the good one to the Lord, I'm stuck with that dumb, dopey, broken one that's all spotted and its back leg's weird. Tape that thing up, let's give that one to the Lord. You can see where the heart is there. When we render our time, our physical or mental energies, which is a lot, or our finances to the Lord, I was looking at it, I was like, well, now I have less and he has more. I don't think the Lord would really require that of me. He's not going to require the best of me. My family needs the best of me. My work needs the best of me. Now you can see how God ends up getting all the backwash from our devotions and from our worship. It should be the heart of the worshiper to render the very best, because he is our God. Anywho, of all your gifts, verse 29, you shall offer up every heave offering due to the Lord. From all the best of them, the consecrated part of them, from all the best part. It's easy to not do that. Well, we're going to give God the junk that we don't need anymore. It's not a proper offering. So therefore you shall say to them, when you have lifted up the best of it, then the rest shall be accounted to the Levites as the produce of the threshing floor and as the produce of the winepress. You may eat it in any place, you and your households, for it is your reward for your work in the tabernacle of meeting. And you shall bear no sin because of it, because you have lifted up the best of it. But you shall not profane the holy gifts of the children of Israel, lest you die. What does that mean? Verse 32. With the sacred stewardship that they have been given, if they abuse it, they profane, if they cheat, lie, steal, pilfer, or misuse anything that is being given to them, they will bear the cost of the iniquity. Even here, sometimes I get weird. It is what it is. But when, people are abusing equipment, sitting weird in chairs, this is why we have, I don't know how many safety backstops at this point we have for the tithes, but we try and make sure that everything is honest and used appropriately in a way that would glorify the Lord and continue the work of the ministry of the gospel. Any misuse, and you invite judgment. So we have 3 warnings, 3 remembrances, 3 reminders that are given to all of Israel. First, of the hammered censers that went onto the altar. It made the altar heavier, and it changed the way the altar looked. Sin does that. The second reminder is Aaron's budded rod. Only by doing things God's way is it going to bring an actual fruit, real fruit. We don't know what those almonds tasted like, but those are God's almonds. Like you got to believe that those almonds probably tasted better than any other almond in the history of almonds. And number 3, it was a very strict verbal warning, but also a warning for the priesthood to function the way that best glorifies God, the way that he has prescribed. But it was also kind of a chapter of blessing, a chapter, a reminder of God's, not just his providence, but his provision. Because when God calls us into a deeper place with him, it's like, Lord, what am I going to do about this? It's easy to get focused and drawn away from what Jesus tells us, I think, in Matthew chapter 6. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be given to you. Where we are as a church now, just church as a whole, we've kind of changed that mentality a little bit. We should bring ourselves back in the place of the Levites. In Revelation chapter 1, we're called a kingdom of priests, or kings and priests, depending on what version you read. Either way, priest is in there. That's us. That's a message very specifically for us, for the church. We need to refocus. We can't be like the Israelites with blurred vision. We have to make sure that our focus is back on the Lord and the things of the Lord. Let's pray together. Lord, thank you for the evening. Thank you for the time in the Word. God, this was a hard section. But I pray, God, that we would have great reminders in our life of the amazing things, Lord, that you have done with us and through us and for us, God. Lord, help us to shift our focus back to you. Through prayer, through fasting, through fellowship, through careful study of your word, or moving of your spirit. Lord, that your children would have a refocusing on you. So that we could again, God, just see miraculous fruit. And we love you and we praise you. We pray in your holy name. Amen.